In this video, I'm going to show you all the different ways early Christians showed their massive hatred for Judas Iscariot, the one who betrayed Jesus Christ. And let me tell you, the stories early Christians told about Judas were both shocking and friggin' hilarious. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, stick around and find out. So, I want to say that early Christians had some pretty good reasons for hating Judas. This man, this terribly cursed man, is known as the betrayer of none other than freaking Jesus. He sprung into action a series of events that led to Jesus being crucified. The story of Judas's betrayal of Jesus is seen in all four canonical gospels. Basically, Caiaphas, the dude who was the high priest, wanted Jesus arrested and killed. He couldn't do this during the time of Passover openly in the streets during Passover feast, or else there'd be rioting. So basically, they needed to arrest Jesus privately wherever Jesus was staying. The problem was that Jesus kept slipping away in secret, avoiding his pursuers. Seeking a quick buck, Judas bartered with Caiaphas for the location where Jesus was staying in exchange for 30 pieces of silver, which would be around 91 to 441 USD in present day value. You heard that right. At best, Judas betrayed Jesus for less than the value needed to buy a PS5 today. On top of that, Judas betrayed him with a kiss to add insult even further. Right before Jesus was arrested, he rightly says this about Judas: "It would be better for him if he had not been born." Matthew 26:24. Hearing all of this, you're probably not going to be surprised that early Christians wrote multiple different accounts of the fate of Judas, two of which come from the New Testament, and none of these accounts have anything good to say about him. Here are some of the worst ones. First, the Gospel of Matthew's account of Judas's demise in chapter 27 verses 1 through 10. After the priests decided to execute Jesus, they handed him over to Pilate. After hearing about all that, Judas tried to return the blood money he received for betraying Jesus, but the priest couldn't be bothered. So Judas threw the money at the temple and went to hang himself. After he hung himself, the priest used the money to buy a field to bury foreigners, the field of blood. Not a pretty way to die. In Acts, there's a different account of Judas's death entirely. When choosing a new apostle in Judas's place, Matthias, Peter gives his account of Judas's death. Basically, he says that Judas himself purchased the field of blood while still alive, and Judas jumped headfirst onto the field. So, his body exploded and his intestines gushed forth on the field. Writing around 100 CE, in his work, Expositions of the Sayings of the Lord, Papias has his own gross account of what happened to Judas. This one, I'm going to be honest, is my favorite for your reasons you're going to see. Papias basically says that Judas caught a bad case of God's wrath. Way worse than COVID, and there ain't no vaccine. He basically, like a pufferfish, became so ridiculously swollen that he could not even pass through an entire street if there was a building on both sides of the street. In the sheer sublime bloated state of Judas, a doctor could not even find the location of his eyes using tools. His unmentionables oozed with pus and worms. It was all too much for this downtrodden soul, and he took his own life by spilling his orange guts, literally. This stank so bad that even a century later, during the lifetime of Papias, one could scarcely walk through the area without physical distress. Yeah, Christians didn't like Judas. The Gospel of Nicodemus has our final version that is just as weird as the other stories. Therein, Judas was remorseful of how he betrayed Jesus. As such, he ventured home to his wife. His wife was cooking a chicken at this time. He conveyed his disgust at his actions and told her that he should kill himself rather than face the punishment of Jesus after he rises from the dead for the betrayal. His wife, amused, told him that he is being ridiculous and that Jesus could not rise from the dead any more than this chicken could, and poof! The chicken rise from the dead whilst being cooked. So Judas decided to hang himself. I seriously don't blame him. These really, shall we say, interesting stories showcase two things in particular. The first is that Judas was a real historical human who lived on this planet. The overwhelming majority of secular scholarship acknowledges Judas as a real person who existed and was involved in the life of Jesus, who was also a real person who existed. For example, Bart Ehrman, in his book, Jesus, Apocalyptic Prophet of the New Millennia, argues that he was a real historical person. Elsewhere, Bart Ehrman argues this as well as these several other individuals on screen. This is intertwined with the second thing we can learn from these stories. If he was just a mythical being, in my opinion, it would be surprising to see the sheer amount of hatred and vitriol he received from thousands of years later. Judas has long since gone down through the pages of history as one of the most hated people who ever lived. And boy oh boy did early Christians in particular hate him. Thanks for watching, and if you learned something, consider subscribing.